I rise to address the cognate debate in relation to the Building Industry Fairness, Security of Payment and Other Legislation Amendment Bill, along with the Housing Availability and Affordability Planning and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2023. Two bills that seek to address two important and significant issues in the form of ensuring that construction subcontractors get paid each time and in the form of the critical need for more housing right across Queensland. Two bills that seek to address two important issues, but both of which fall short of the mark. Bills that promise a lot, but bills that will deliver very little. I'm going to start with the Building Industry Fairness legislation first. We hear that the bill aims to, and I quote, protect subcontractor payments, encourage prompt payment by the trustee of subcontractor entitlements, and reduce the severity of insolvency impacts to subcontractors who have little form of legal protection, end quote. A sound objective, but one that I think I'll show my contribution that this bill will not deliver on. So what do I say to that, Deputy Speaker? Well, the evidence is clear that project bank account arrangements have not protected subcontractors when head contractors have gone into liquidation. I know of at least 4 entities where head contractors have gone into liquidation and subcontractors have not been paid the funds that they were owed by those head contractors. It's been reported that when builder PBS went into liquidation, their project bank account did not have sufficient funds to cover the debts owing to subcontractors who had worked on their sites. I'm advised, Deputy Speaker, that despite this, PBS management did not break any security of payment legislation, but nonetheless, despite complying with the state government's security of payment legislation, subcontractors on PBS sites did not receive payment for the services they had rendered and for the money that they were owed. If I look closer to home on the Sunshine Coast, builder NCM fell over early last year. I'm advised that NCM were working on state government social housing projects that were required to comply with security of payment legislation. Despite this, subcontractors from my community of Buderim didn't get paid for the work that they performed on NCM projects. Contractors who installed flooring, electricians, fencing contractors, they have all not been paid by NCM for the work they performed. Not paid for work that should have been protected by this state government's project bank account provisions, and that this bill will do nothing to address the reasons why they were not paid. The explanatory notes talk about the fact that since the establishment, project bank accounts, or project trust accounts as they've now been renamed, have, quote, secured funds in more than 1,200 contracts to the value of more than $20.7 billion, end quote. The explanatory notes imply that this was a measure of success for the security of payment regime, when in fact the measure of success should be what happens when the head contractor goes into liquidation. Do subcontractors get paid when a head contractor falls over and goes into liquidation? Does security of payment legislation result, as the Minister contends it does, that subcontractors will get paid every single time? Deputy Speaker, the answer is it doesn't. Security of payment arrangements in Queensland are flawed, and while this legislation improves some of the regulatory requirements around the regime, it doesn't address the fundamental failings of these arrangements, which means that subbies will continue to not get paid when they should. I've listened extensively in my capacity as the Shadow Minister for Small Business to stakeholders such as master builders, HIA, master electricians and master plumbers, and I acknowledge that there are a diversity of views around the security of payment arrangements. The LNP will not oppose the provisions that aim to make life easier for builders and head contractors who must comply with security of payment legislation, but it's my view that the measure of success for any security of payment regime must be ensuring that subbies get paid when a head contractor falls over. If we're going to impose this additional regulation on builders, then surely it must be able to at least deliver on the promise that subbies will get paid. Deputy Speaker, turning now to the Housing Availability and Affordability Bill. Supposedly this bill is going to fix the housing crisis afflicting so much of Queensland. But, Deputy Speaker, as is so often the case with this Palaszczuk-Miles Labor state government, this bill is more about shifting the blame rather than taking real action. More than 20,000 Queenslanders are now living without a roof over their head because of the failures of this tired third-term Labor state government. We've got skyrocketing rents right across the state because we have less land being released for new housing and a Labor state government intent on driving away investors. After 9 years and 3 state government housing forums, building approvals are down 31% year on year. Even if they can afford skyrocketing rents, families can't even find a home to live in, and the number of people sleeping rough has exploded. Deputy Speaker, apparently this is success under Labor. I beg to differ. As many members have mentioned, every week my constituents come to me asking for help to get a roof over their head. Sunshine Coast locals Emma and Robert Neld approached me after their lease ended and they found themselves and their 3 kids without a home. When I met with them, along with the Shadow Treasurer, they'd ended up living in a camper trailer in a Sunshine Coast backyard. 3 young kids, 2 adults living under canvas in a camper trailer. That is hardly what we should consider as acceptable in Queensland. Through no fault of their own, despite having a good rental history, having the income to pay skyrocketing rents, Emma and Robert found themselves homeless. In response, Emma and Robert have uprooted their family and moved away from the Sunshine Coast to the Darling Downs. Not because they wanted to, not to move closer to family or for a job opportunity. Emma and Robert moved away from their friends, their children's schooling and their employment because they had to, because they couldn't find a home. Deputy Speaker, that is not good government. In our advanced economy, we must do better for people like Emma and Robert. This legislation does nothing meaningful to address that problem. Deputy Speaker, any solution to the housing crisis requires collaboration between state and local government, not a dictatorship, collaboration. And a Christopher Lee LNP state government will work proactively with local governments to protect the character of our suburbs and to improve housing affordability with more land supply. With new development, Deputy Speaker, we need more infrastructure like roads and rails and schools to support the growing population, something that this Labor state government have also dropped the ball on. When they cut critical projects like the Mooloola River Interchange, this Labor state government make it harder for families who want to move to the Sunshine Coast. Trunk infrastructure like roads and rail support a growing population, and without that adequate investment in roads and rail, we're doomed to fail. A Christopher Lee LNP government will help Queenslanders realise their dream of owning their own home. Home ownership should not be out of reach for working Queenslanders, and the last thing that we should accept is that young Queenslanders are giving up on the dream of ever owning their own home. Deputy Speaker, social housing is an important part of the housing mix, but far too often this state government forget about home ownership, and we should do everything we can to make it easier for every Queenslander to buy their own home and to control their own destiny. Deputy Speaker, the LNP will work with local councils to develop timely plans for the future of every Queensland region. In doing so, we'll identify what infrastructure and services are needed to accommodate that growth, and that is particularly important on the Sunshine Coast. On that note, I want to acknowledge the re-election of my local government representatives, Councillor Ted Hungerford and Councillor Christian Dixon. Christian Dixon was elected unopposed, the only councillor on the Sunshine Coast to do so, which is a testament to the high regard he's held in my community. My commitment to both Christian and Ted is to work collaboratively to address challenges like housing availability. I and my LNP colleagues will work collaboratively with local council to deliver critical infrastructure like the Mooloola River Interchange, the Sugar Road, Mooloolaba Road intersection, Sunshine Coast Heavy Rail all the way to Maroochydore, because without the road and rail infrastructure the Sunshine Coast needs, we won't be able to house the many thousands of people who are moving to the coast every single year. And unlike the current Labor state government, we will listen and we will act because we know that Queenslanders deserve better, and it's time to show Labor the door in 24.
Speaker.